So we talk about the equality of things. Everything is actually equally existent or equally non-existent on that account. For instance, if you look at your parents or even if you have children, the delusion or the illusion or what they call Maya is to think that they're actually your children or even actually your parents. This is only a matter of time and mutation, basically, which every creature goes through from, the fetus to adulthood to senility. But time in of itself is actually one of the things that makes this realm or experience an illusion. Time along with the mutation. The mutations, again, that's the constant flux. That makes it impermanent. That makes it non-enduring, which would technically make it unreal. It's irreal. It doesn't have the permanence that you see with your eyeball consciousness, a normal life. And we're really talking about life in of itself. You don't want to so much get distracted by your environment and your society because those things come and go. They always change and transition. When you're trying to get to the root of things, when you're trying to get into consciousness, you're going to have to look at things fundamentally. So what they're talking about really is the body and mind. To the eye consciousness, you don't see someone age. It's like when we see somebody, we see an old person or a baby or, an adult or a teenager. These transitions, these mutations, they never really stop, of course. And there's no permanence there. There's really no actual teenager to the subtle mind. There's actually no line of demarcation to the subtle mind, which is actually the enlightened mind. Now, of course, to the conventional mind, you're hard pressed to actually see somebody transitioning from, youth to old age. You can't see it, yet you see the result. Um, Again, because that's part of the illusion, and that has to do with time, of course, and mutation. This change and decay, this ripening and rotting process that everyone goes through. It's always taking place. It's never really stopped. So that's why they would say, well, that has a lot to do with why they would say you're non-existent in the sense that at what point did you exist as such? Always in the state of becoming or unbecoming. So again, it's illusory from that aspect. So again, the time also, of course, plays a part. Some people would say that there's no time, there's just change of location and state. There's actually no time. You're just saying time. You're inventing time, really, with you're superimposing something called time onto something that is actually timeless. But if you say this is timeless, then you're gonna not understand what the actual timeless really means. But of course, what we call time and mutation is an illusion because again, everything is actually equally existent, or you can say non-existent. Again, you can take your children or your parents and, for instance, try to shrink yourself down to the size of your child and the age of your child. And, just imagine having a conversation with them, what you would talk about, what they would talk about. And you can also do this with your parents if your parents are older. Of course, you would, you want to age yourself a little bit and take on their age or whatever. And you just think about, try to imagine what you would talk about, with them. Imagine yourself dialoguing with your parents. And this is sort of like an exercise to get you to see the equality in things. Because again, if you take time into account, you're falling for the okey doke. That's part of the illusion. So again, that's what they mean by, they're actually not your kids or your parents. Like, well, yeah, they are. Well, yeah, as far as your animal condition, you were, screaming hungry, and as soon as you came in, someone had to stick something in your mouth, down your throat, for your sustenance, constantly from that point on. Your condition of constantly needing to eat and excrete is what they nurtured mainly. And of course, that's why you would need a job or whatever, so you can pretty much support your eating, excreting on top of your fucking and breeding. So that's the foundation of our existence at its core. So what you call your parents or your children are merely just vehicles to support that process, that scenario, this circle jerk of human growth and decay. But again, you could have to see it. It's an illusion. You're equally existent. I know it's hard for people because you're told to respect your parents. In a sense, um, at a level, you do respect your parents. But honestly, there's a level where you have to disregard them as far as your concerns and your consciousness goes. They have to be disregarded. And that's what they mean by detachment. Also, children also. Just in consciousness. Now, of course, I'm not telling you to, let the child starve, but there comes a point where you need to understand that, it's not yours. You're just taking care of another being that you can't really control because, again, you are equally non existent with that being. It's just that you're deluded by the time and the mutations. That's part of the illusion. Again, the delusion also, because again, everything is equally existent in actuality. Now, some of us in consciousness sort of perceive this also when it comes to, say, your elders or whatever. You probably notice that you're much wiser and sharper than them, even though they've so called lived longer than you. So, at what point, do you admit that, well, maybe I shouldn't necessarily pay this blind familial respect to them? Because that would be stupid. And that's, again, based in your animal condition, which is based in bewilderment and delusion by this time, this change and decay, these formations that come and go at different times. So it appears, again, that's an old lady. But of course, 30, 40 years ago, she was probably, someone you were probably trying to get with. So you got to remember that. So again, if you were to exercise your imagination that way and just see, hey, if you were your parents' age or your child's age and you had a conversation, it would pretty much, what the conversation would be like. So actually, in a sense, you actually are equally existent slash non-existent with them. And of course, that also gets you to see through the illusion, of course, of what they call Maya. See, people talk about these matrix, this Maya, but well, how do you see through it though? It's very simple to see through it if you look at it in a certain context, with a certain realism. But also, you have to use your imagination, of course, your insight to break the spell. You can break it. You can see right through it. So yes, it's an illusion, but in a much more real sense than you think. And they say that the procession of births is unreal. And it's like, well, what does that mean? What does that mean? Well, you can actually look at it, as I mentioned, with nutrition. Of course, when you devour flesh and you absorb and assimilate the flesh energies or whatever, and they transform and help to support semen, which then, and of course, in a woman, that would go into her essence and the eggs, of course. And then you get the creation of a new creature out of that, out of the flesh of another creature, which fed into the creation of another being who's actually going to do the same process, or he may be eaten, and then that creature will use that sustenance to fuel the process of his reproduction. And see, it's like an infinite loop, which dilutes it into unreality. So again, this is why they say the procession of births is unreal, because it's like a bunch of organisms and organic material and assimilating and excreting each other and replicating each other. But it's such a boondoggle or whatever. It gets diluted into again irreality. Like you can't point to one part and say, well, that exists in of itself. It's sort of this matrix. So again, that would also point to the fact that all of those so-called parts are equally existent, or esoterically speaking, equally non-existent. Peace.